Artists usually don't like to run. Artists and art people are typically negatively biased against running. Running is somehow denigrating art. Running art does not appear suitably dignified. Therefore, artists don't like running art, or running artists. The interjection run is insulting to them. So observes science fiction writer Bruce Sterling. I would never have believed that the New York City Marathon could make one weep. It is a vision of doomsday. The runners are all seeking death, the death from exhaustion. There are too many of them, and their message no longer has any meaning. It is an obscure message about a superhuman and futile effort. So opines Jean Baudrillard in his book America. Western civilization, in its best sense, was born with the promenade. Walking is a sensitive spiritual act. Jogging, however, has nothing to do with meditation. So says Hélène Finkielkraut, a leading French intellectual in the year 2007, who demanded that the then newly elected president and runner Nicolas Sarkozy to give up what Finkielkraut calls an undignified exercise, claiming that strolling is the proper activity of the thinking person. Finkielkraut's claim follows the headline by the French left-wing newspaper Libération that asks, "Is jogging right-wing?" No is this researcher's simple response to this simplistic question. The fuller retort of how running can be a political act or action of resistance, and even an anarchic movement, in both the literal and figurative senses of the words action and movement, can be found in the written thesis. This presentation, however, focuses on running as a creative process. By creative, it is the processes of thinking, discourse, and imagination that are referred to here. Far from being meaningless, death-seeking, and futile, it will be argued that running is a meaningful and rewarding activity, not only physically but intellectually. Along the way, it will be shown how the critics are being unliberal in choosing to ignore the plethora of scientific, historical, artistic, philosophical, and anthropological evidence of how running can be sensitive, spiritual, and dignified. The argument draws upon original, as well as interdisciplinary and cross-cultural research. At its foundation is the ancient Chinese way of life of Taoism and its complex system of correlation. Unlike the Cartesian mind-body split, the Taoist body works hand in hand with the mind. Inspired by the current running boom, this hypothesis harnesses the simplicity and science of running. Field work in the form of studio practice, in which this researcher acquires the first-hand experience of running, is also carried out. A sense of playfulness, nourished from running, and the irreverence of the Taoist wanderers is at the heart of this argument. This playfulness is the motivation behind the word play and non-literal explorations of words in the approach of this argument. Therefore, apart from running in the physical sense, running in the metaphorical sense is also explored. By the end of this presentation, the audience should be convinced that Baudrillard, Finkielkraut, and other so-called intellectuals, French or otherwise, are but unfit critics. In the year 2004, anthropologist Daniel Lieberman, who is a runner, and biologist Dennis Bramble shared their research of having uncovered fossil evidence that proves that the human body has been designed with running equipment. These include the nuchal ligament, which is the bone found at one's neck, as well as a large posterior, both of which enable the human being to maintain balance while moving at a speed faster than walking. Echoing the work of several other researchers, Bramble and Lieberman also argue that the human being began to run long distances to hunt for food 2 million years ago. It is argued, in fact, that the practice known as endurance hunting has played a pivotal role in ensuring the survival of the human species. While the human body is what Bramble and Lieberman describe as a beautifully tuned running machine, the human mind also plays a vital role in enabling the hunters to run up to 20 miles or 6.5 hours at a stretch after the antelope without any feeling of pain. In scientific terms, continuous physical activity causes the production of pain-relieving neurotransmitters known as endogenous morphine or endorphins. Also known as runner's high, neuroscientist Professor Henning Bucker describes this as a euphoric state resulting from long-distance running. To be sure, endorphins can be acquired from other activities, such as sex, love, and other continuous stretches of strenuous physical exercises. Yet, the fact that running demands no skills at all means that one's body can function at an automatic mode after the first miles of running, hence freeing the mind to wonder and ponder. Experiments conducted by the International Society of Sport and Psychology even report that while 20 to 30 minutes of exercise may be sufficient for stress reduction, 60 minutes of running may result in an increased mental well-being, increased alertness, and clearer thinking. Scientists at Baruch College in New York also state that, along with euphoria, runners may become more creative while running, and therefore better equipped to solve problems. That is why a philosopher-cum-runner says that running is inherently philosophical, while another says that running is a reflective endeavor. Anthropologist Peter N. Jones even argues that the experience of ultra-runners, that is, runners who run beyond 26 miles or approximately 3 hours and beyond, are equivalent to meditative states attained by the traditional indigenous practices. And who better than the marathon monks of Japan to refer to correlate running with the spiritual? The monks of the Tendai Buddhist sect chant and run the equivalent of 2 marathons daily for a large part of the task for 1,000 days, as an exercise to seek self-transcendence, covering a total distance of around 40,000 kilometers, which equates the diameter of the Earth. In short, not only does the human mind enable running, it is rewarded for running. In fact, given that a sustained period of running can alter one's state of consciousness, runners refer to running long, slow distances as LSD. With this, one can draw a link between running and the Taoist cultivation technique of Tai Chi. Described by a Taoism scholar as a slow, supple dance, the martial art is understood as meditation in motion. Given its meditative and even transcendent quality, the long-distance run can give Tai Chi a run for its money, but without the exotica. To be sure, stillness and walking may also be conducive to certain modes of thinking. Rousseau, Richard Long, and William Wordsworth are but some examples of artists and intellectuals who are keen walkers. That said, it can be argued that the merits of walking tends to be romanticized and overrated. One wonders if, without the crutches of wine, hashish, and opium, the trips of Charles Baudelaire, Charles Dickens, and Thomas de Quincey would have been less uplifting, and if walking can remain such a sensitive spiritual act, or the concepts of the psychogeography and the riff, or even the entire Western civilization, to quote Finkelkraut's polemical claim, may have materialized without drugs. The one who runs rejects artificial chemicals and suits the sartorial choice of the physically indolent philosopher, flaneur, dandy, academic, and some artists alike, since the runner must perspire to earn their runner's high. As a powerful correlation of the mind and body, the process of running can reward the one who runs with creative insight that physician runner Mike Stroud calls a heightened state of thought. Sadly, Finkelkraut, Baudrillard, and other non-runners will never grasp what runners already know all along, given that they consider themselves above the all-too-simple act of placing one foot after the other, heaving in public, or to suffer the indignity of dressing in lycra or shorts, or leaving the comforts of their armchair. Even if they did, they may not be fit enough to go beyond the first miles in the first place, and will therefore be denied the wonders of LSD. Even the bitterness of the critics can be explained scientifically. Deprived as they are of endorphins, Stroud argues that those favoring a sedentary lifestyle inadvertently spend much of their lives in a slightly depressed mental state. One can but express sympathy to the unfit and sad critics. There is no shortage of intellectuals and artists to comprehend how running can nourish creativity. Whenever immobilized by problems he faced at the laboratory, a young man would take off for a run to work off his feelings. So accomplished was this runner that he was even shortlisted for the 1948 Olympics. It was even during a run that this person is said to have conceptualized the computer. This person was none other than Alan Turing, the father of the computer. For writer Joyce Carol Oates, running is her antidote to the writer's block. To invigorate literary mind, start moving literary feet, she urges. Running, she says. If there is any activity happier, more exhilarating, more nourishing to the imagination, I can't think of what it might be. In running, the mind flees with the body. The mysterious efflorescence of language seems to pulse in the brain, in rhythm with our feet and the swinging of our arms. Interestingly, it is precisely such an action, the pounding of feet and swinging of arms, that critics will not be caught dead in. Haruki Murakami ran every day he was composing his surrealist novel Kafka on the Shore. In fact, this cult novelist participates in at least one marathon and one Ironman triathlon annually, and has even completed a 100-kilometer ultra-marathon race. Then there is Abdul Qadir Benali, who consistently comes in top 35 in any marathon race. As the novelist says, all writers are long-distance runners. There is also Critical Run, in which artists debate while running. It describes itself as an art format for criticism, a stimulating, debating, and sweating format. Conceived by Danish-French artist Thierry Geoffroy, topics discussed include immigration, multiculturalism, and the role of the artist in society. Like running physically, it is argued that running metaphorically can be a creative process. This is where Taoism steps in again. The Chinese character is made up of two radicals, one depicting a motion verb of the feet, and the other a human head. At one level, the word Tao refers to way, road, or path. At the same time, Tao also concerns speaking, doctrine, and discourse, precisely because of its sense of movement and directionality. Hence, in a single stroke, Tao correlates movement and thought, body with mind, the literal and the figurative, creativity and motion. This was perhaps why Lao Tzu, the Chinese philosopher and founder of Taoism, restlessly wandered the world 2,500 years ago, quote, as if I have no home to return to, unquote. Martin Heidegger, whose philosophy is said to have a distinctly Taoist flavor, even argues that the Tao is, quote, not just the key word in the poetic thinking of Lao Tzu, but as the way that gives all ways, the very source of our power to think, unquote. Scholars of Chinese refer to this poetic thinking as analogical or correlative thinking, which governs the Chinese and, in particular, Taoist world, explaining its correlation of the human body with the universe, as well as Taoism's affinity for metaphor and wordplay, and the pictographic nature of the Chinese language. This spatial way of thinking is a way of mapping the relationships between things that do not exist in a linear cause and effect sequence. Philosophers David Hall and Roger Amis argue that while dominant Western thinking privileges the rational, analytical, abstract, and formal, correlative thinking emphasizes the aesthetic and imaginative, spontaneous, and experiential. Correlative thinking is characterized by movement and restlessness. A pattern governed by correlativity is particular for the substance it carries. Such a configuration cannot work if this substance is replaced. That is to say, form is inseparable from content, and each correlation is unique and sensitive. Since every mapping is different, the correlative thinker is compelled to undertake not one, but a series of encounters. That is why Hall and Amis argue that correlativity characterizes process. Such a process can even be potentially transgressive. It is argued that when the correlative thinker metaphorically moves from one discourse to another, tensions and clashes can arise. Ripped from one's comfort zone, and instead running into various zones of conflict from the various discourses, the one who runs must necessarily re-examine the values that one holds. With such a deliberate mapping of disparate thoughts, the intertextual discourses that arise can potentially be much more exciting than those that exist when one does not move about. The correlative thinker engages in a continual process of moving, thinking, working things out, having one's thoughts challenged, hence resisting to stay still, or complacent. While exhausting, such a restless process is far from suicidal, as Baudrillard claims about running, but life-affirming. As Lao Tzu says, one must cultivate oneself to be soft and nimble, as living imperfect against the hard fixation of the dead perfect. With boundaries crossed and redrawn, the process can be potentially subversive or even transgressive, moving across and beyond boundaries. It may even be argued that the locomotion in correlative thinking is that of running. This time, it is the Latin source of the word discourse from which this argument stems. According to the Oxford Dictionary of Philosophy, discourses refers to a running, not walking, from one place to another, which explains the meaning of discourse, that is, a continuous stretch of language containing more than one sentence, conversations, narratives, arguments, speeches. Now, previously, it has been argued how a continuous stretch of running for extended periods of time can affect one's creativity and thinking. With this new understanding of the words discourses and discourse, a correlation between running and language, arguments, and speeches can be established. This correlation is evident in another way. The word discourse originated in the 16th century. In his book Running, A Global History, historian Tor Gotthas argues how, in the days before modern transportation, professional runners were employed as messengers throughout Europe from the 15th to the 18th century. That runners functioned as a source of message and ideas, linking one place or person to another, may be an explanation for why a discourse originates from a running from one place to another. In the first part of this presentation, it was argued how the production of runner's high can make the process of running creative. In the second part, it is argued that a metaphorical process of running is also related to thinking, via a correlation of the Chinese character of Tao, the order of correlative thinking, and Latin source of the word discourse. Hence, the process of running physically and metaphorically can be creative. The term trans-dimensional running is coined to describe this methodology. The prefix trans alludes not only to the transformative nature of running, but how it allows one to move across beyond boundaries, and how it can even be a transgressive and transcendent process. In order to test out the hypothesis of trans-dimensional running, this researcher has picked up running, covering an average of 10 kilometers or an hour daily for the past 800 days, and with a maximum continual running duration of 5.5 hours thus far. Interestingly for this runner, the thought process generated during episodes of runner's high are not linear but correlative. That is to say, while running physically, a metaphorical process of running also takes place for this runner. For instance, over the period of 2 weeks in December 2011, an intense rush of creative energy during each of the run was reported. Engaging in a physical activity that the mind and body of this researcher was by now efficient in, the mind was free to roam, and indeed go on an overdrive, generating new mappings after each of the runs. It is concluded that the physical and metaphorical processes of running can be creative. With running, one's body is correlated with the mind in a poetic manner. As a playful application of correlativity, transdimensional running may open playful inroads to the modes of causality. And if it cannot provide such concepts as the rhizome, a run for its money, it is hoped that transdimensional running could provide some food for thought. As it can be seen, the way the hypothesis is constructed is itself also from a restless running back and forth between the various discourses. With the interjection of the philosophical and poetic to the exercise of running, this argument can add new leg to long-running studies of the tradition of walking, as well as to make skeptics of running sit up and reassess their unliberal elitism towards the exercise, and even perhaps take the first steps towards change, to run. As a writer says, Baudrillard was critical of running precisely because he was fascinated by it. Deprived as he was of a physical and intellectual exercise that is also life-affirming, euphoric, meaningful, rewarding, transformative, subversive, and even transgressive and transcendent. The one who runs today not only generates a correlation with our ancestors 2 million years ago, but draws a connection between the Chinese and Latin etymologies of the word discourse. As Stroud argues, skeptics simply know not what they miss. Thank you very much indeed.